Now we're going to look at the same exact fiscal policy, but instead of assuming the Keynesian model, we're going to assume a neoclassical model. In our neoclassical model, we again label the price level axis. We label the horizontal axis real GDP. The short and average supply curve is upward sloping in the neoclassical model because in the neoclassical model, prices are assumed to be flexible and not sticky, along with wages. And short average supply curve slopes up primarily because if prices generally rise, the price level goes up. So if prices generally rise and we hold other things constant, the profits that firms are making increase. So if they can increase outputs, they can increase profits as prices go up. That's why the short and average supply curve slopes up. You can also think of it as the aggregated marginal cost curve or supply curves of all the firms in the economy. Then the aggregate demand curve is exactly what it was before. No change here. It's downward sloping. The longer average supply curve is the same as it was in the previous model in question 1. We can find the equilibrium by plugging in the original demand curve and our new supply curve. Our new supply curve is 4 plus 0.5 y. And you can see short and aggregate supply is right here. Aggregate demand is right there, and they intersect at 20 and 14, which by design is the same equilibrium as we had in question 1, the Keynesian model. So GDP is 20 and the price level is 14. I can also use algebra. This is the supply curve. This is the demand curve. Solve for y and I get 20. If I plug 20 into here, 20 times 0.5 is 10. 10 plus 4 is 14. If I plug 20 into here, 20 times 0.3 is 6. 6 subtracted from 20 is 14. So the equilibrium price level is 14, and I give it to you there. The output gap is like it was before. It's the difference in GDP and potential GDP. And it's negative because GDP is less than 23.5. It's less than potential. So again, the output gap is a negative 3.5. The fiscal budget balance starts out at balanced. The fiscal budget is balanced initially. So the fiscal budget balance is $0 trillion. The unemployment rate is greater than the natural unemployment rate. And again, these terms come from the list down below. Okay, unemployment is high because GDP is less than potential. So politicians propose what? They'll propose an increase in government expenditures. And here they propose an increase of $0.5 trillion. Now remember when government spending is increased in our model, the increase in G, government spending, increases the value of the intercept, which pushes the aggregate demand curve up from the black curve to the red curve. Okay, just like it did in the Keynesian model. Okay, so we want to calculate the new value of GDP. We use Desmos, right? Use Desmos here. The price level, or the new aggregate demand curves, this red line. The old one was 20 plus or minus 0.3, right? Now it's 20.5 minus 0.3, and it moves the aggregate demand curve out a little bit, and the equilibrium is now 20.625. We could use algebra 2, right? And we get 20.625. Now this wasn't as big as the bump in GDP in the Keynesian model. And the reason why that is because as GDP's increased, right, prices are flexible in the neoclassical model. The higher demand means it crosses short aggregate supply at a new point on the upward sloping short aggregate supply curve. Okay. So prices are being bid up by government. Government's buying a bunch of products. So prices are being bid up. Okay, so the upward sloping supply curve dampens the effect on GDP. Remember, in the Keynesian model, when we did the increase in government spending, GDP increased to 21.667, right? That's a 1.667% or $1.667 trillion increase in GDP. In the neoclassical model, GDP only increases by, let me get it here, $0.625 trillion. See that? Because prices are being bid up along the short and aggregate supply curve that we're holding constant. The output gap is still relatively large. Potential GDP is 23.5. That's what GDP should be if all resources are being 100% utilized. But GDP is only 20.625, so the gap is the difference in these two numbers here. So it's the difference in these two numbers right there. And that is, oh, sorry, the price level is 14.31. See there? I give that to you. All you got to do is plug in 20.625 into here, and you can get the price level 14.31. Let me show you in Desmos. So 20.5 minus 0.3 times the new GDP level, which is 20.625. And I get 14.31. I could have also plugged it into the supply curve. The supply curve is 4 plus 0.5, and then we got to multiply that by 20.5 times the 20.625. That's what real GDP is. In either case, you get the same number. See that? 14.31. Now the output gap, like I said, is the difference in these two numbers, and it equals a negative 2.875. So that difference, and it's negative. The fiscal budget balance, if you remember, started out at 0, but we did this increase of $0.5 trillion. So the original budget deficit was 0. We increased government spending above taxes by 0.5. Our new fiscal budget deficit is 0.5. Okay. The unemployment rate is still greater than the natural rate of unemployment. The government spending multiplier is the increase in GDP. Now, the increase in GDP this is what GDP is. Whoops, let me change that. This is what GDP is after the increase in government spending. And this is what GDP was initially, right? So that difference is that. Okay? The denominator is the increase in government expenditure. So we got the increase in GDP divided by the increase in government expenditure. And we get a multiplier that's only 1.25, much smaller than it was in the Keynesian model. And the reason why is because we're allowing prices to be flexible and rise along the short and aggregate supply curve as prices are being bid up by higher overall aggregate demand. So it dampens the increase in GDP, and it lowers the value of the government spending multiplier. And it implies that each $1 increase in government expenditure caused real GDP to increase by just $1.25. Now, real GDP went up, but it didn't go up by much, did it? It is 20.625, right, at the red dot. It was 20 at the black dot. So what it is minus what it was divided by what it was times 100 is a 3.1% increase in GDP. Now, in the Keynesian model, prices didn't go up. We assumed they were sticky. But here, prices went from 14 to 14.31. So the inflation rate is what the price level is at the red dot minus what the price level was at that black dot, divided by what it was times 100. And here we get an inflation rate of 2.2%. In stage 2, Congress is going to change the tax code with a tax cut of $0.714 trillion. So our initial deficit was zero. We added $0.5 trillion to it because we increased government spending by $0.5 trillion. Then we're going to add another 0.714 to it because of the tax cut. Now the tax cut does what? It lowers the value of t in our model, which does the opposite to the intercept. So we go from the red line up to the blue line. Okay? Our new GDP level is found by setting the new aggregate demand curve equal to the original short-run aggregate supply curve, and then using algebra and solving for GDP of 21.25. But we could have also used Desmos. The new demand curve is 21, right? Let me get rid of this here. The new demand curve is 21 minus 0.3y. The supply curve hasn't changed, and GDP is $21.25 trillion. Okay, so it's just a little bit more than the 20.625. Again, this is a muted effect. The tax cut has a muted effect here because short-run aggregate supply curve slopes up. If you remember, going all the way back to the Keynesian model when we cut taxes, it was a much different picture, right? We went from 21.667 to 23.33, almost closing the gap, right? But unlike the Keynesian model, in this model, the assumption is that prices are flexible. So you get a muted effect here. Okay. Okay, now, so GDP only increases to 21.25 here, and it's a long ways away from 23.5, right? When we plug that into the demand curve, we get 14.63. So let's go to Desmos, and I'll copy this here, down here, and I'll get rid of the y, and then I'll multiply by that new level of GDP, 21.25, and we get a price level of 14.625. Rounding it, we get a price level of 14.63. Okay, so that's how you get that price level. Okay, so the gap, the output gap is this new GDP level subtracted from potential. Potential is this vertical black line. This new GDP level is this blue dashed line. So you take that difference and you get a negative 2.25. So we still got a substantial gap here. The fiscal budget balance again is 1.214 because we take the original budget deficit, 0, add on to it the increase in government spending, then add on onto that the tax cut of 0.714. The unemployment rate is greater than the natural unemployment rate. The tax cut multiplier the tax cut multiplier is, hang on a second. The increase in GDP, after the increase in government spending was 20.625. We followed that up with a cut in taxes, and that pushed GDP up to 21.25. So you take the difference of these two and you get 0.625. Now the increase in government spending, the cut in taxes was 0.714, so we lowered taxes by that amount, and that created an increase in GDP of 0.625. So the ratio of those two changes is our multiplier. And you take that ratio and you get negative 0.875. Which implies that each dollar increase or cut in taxes increases GDP by only 88 cents or $0.88. Now, real GDP increased, again, it increased from 20.625 to 21.25 from the point where the government spending effects had been taking place to the tax cut effects taking place, right? So from phase 1 to phase 2, GDP increased. It increased from 20.625 at the red dot, red equilibrium, to 21.25 at the blue equilibrium. And the growth rate ends up being 3%. What it is minus what it was divided by what it was times 100. So economic growth rate here is 3%. Now the price level, after the increase in government spending was felt, the price level had bumped up to 14.31. And then we did the tax cut. So the price level jumped up again to 14.63. So prices in general rose or increased, and they increased by this percentage here. This is what the price level is after the tax cut. This is what the price level was after the increase in government spending. This is what it is minus what it was, divided by what it was, and you get an inflation rate of 2.2%. Okay, the ratio, remember the ratio of the tax cut multiplier and the government spending multiplier. The tax cut multiplier is 0.875. The government spending multiplier is 1.25. And that ratio is 0.7, which is the MPC, right? Subtracting that from 1 gives us the slope of the aggregate demand curve of 0.3. Again, that's not coincidence. It's just by the assumption of the modeling. And that is the MPS, marginal propensity to save, right? Okay. 1 minus 0.7 is 0.3. And if you remember correctly, that was the slope of our aggregate demand curves, right? 0.3. The slope of our aggregate demand curve is 0.3. The slope of our aggregate demand curve, 0.3. So in our model here, the slope of our aggregate demand curve is the marginal propensity to save.